Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where in the world you find yourself. I'm Lesley Donna Williams. I'm a member of ICRRA Network. ICRRA stands for the International Cultural Relations Research Alliance. Welcome to the 2025 ICRRA Conference. Our focus this year is conflicted culture, resilience and cooperation to thriving in a changing world orders, which takes place as a pre-event UNESCO's MONDIACULT World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development. Today, we're delighted to have you join our session, which is a keynote, which is fantastic, with Cecilia Milesi, which I'll introduce shortly. And her focus for today's discussion is reshaping international cooperation in an upside-down, multipolar world. We're going to have 5 sessions in the conference, so hopefully we will see you again. There are 2 more today. There's more taking place tomorrow. But before we jump into today's conversation, I'd love to share with you the overall aims of our conference. So firstly, ICRRA, the network, brings together global research and insights on theory and practice in international cultural relations. When we talk about cultural relations, we are talking about ways of working internationally in the areas of art, education, and civil society to build trust and understanding, to promote collaboration, and to enhance sustainable dialogue between people and cultures. And I'm sure you can imagine, as we go into today's conversation, we'll see how pressing it is, especially in the current world order. However, we live in an era marked by increased violent conflicts, competing narratives, and resurgent nationalism. If we hope to develop more inclusive and representative frameworks for our field, historical reflection and post-colonial approaches are essential, as are practices and our relearning. At the heart of these global shifts lies a pressing need to free culture and political instrumentalization, and to find new ways to strengthen cultural cooperation, both online and offline, in order to promote our trust and mutual understanding. The conference addresses these challenges in bringing together different perspectives and providing a critical conversation on the future of international cooperation and the ability of non-state actors to establish long-standing international cultural relations. The various panels will focus, among others, on the work of foreign mediation organizations with cultural actors and artists in the WANA region, the cross-border mobilization of artists against right-wing authoritarianism, and the role of the digital sphere in promoting or hindering democracy and intergenerational dialogue. We aim for the conference to be a laboratory, a place for dialogue, and a starting point for various processes and actions. We hope that you will join us in opening a constructive discussion and ask that all of our participants interact in a respectful manner. So we're glad to have you as part of the discussion. I'm sure it will be incredibly rich and rewarding for all of us and create an impact real impact in the world. So I'm going to ask that throughout the session that you post your questions, your comments, reflections, and by the end of the discussion, we aim to have covered all your questions, or at least commented on it. Fellow participants, you're also welcome to read everyone else's questions in the chat, and you may want to comment on that too. So it's my pleasure to introduce Cecilia Milesi. We've had a few wonderful conversations already, and maybe just to share how the session will run today, to put you also at ease on where you can engage. We have time initially for Cecilia's keynote, which will be roughly 30 to 45 minutes. Cecilia and I will then have a brief conversation where I will also react to her presentation and ask a few questions. And then we're going to open up for a round of questions to the audience. So please stay tuned. We want to hear you. We want to be inclusive. We want to have your conversation, or have you as part of the conversation. So briefly on Cecilia's incredible bio or profile, she is the founder of the Global Change Center. Cecilia explores how international cooperation can evolve in today's complex multipolar world. We'll be hearing a lot about that today, drawing on principles of equity and justice rooted in global South and decolonization. She has experience working with Amnesty International, UN Office for South-to-South Cooperation, and then, of course, the Global Change Center. So, Cecilia, I'm looking forward to the practical insights you're going to be sharing with us on how we drive and especially looking at like equity-driven initiatives. So, Cecilia, welcome. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Lesley. It's really nice to be here this morning for me with all of you. It's very grateful to ICRRA and IFA for the invitation to share a few thoughts, insights from my practice and my activism and my professional career. Besides, before we start unpacking what does it mean to reshape international cooperation in today's world, I wanted to take a few seconds to remember and to think together with all of you present here that as we speak, there are hundreds of people, millions of people at the moment dying of hunger, being killed, not only in Palestine, but in Congo, in Sudan, in many of our countries. There are people that are being persecuted and arrested, even in Europe or the United States, because just for being immigrants or because of the color of their skin. So it's a very serious moment, probably one of the most serious world moments of our times after the Second World War, perhaps. We are going through genocide. We are really a tangible situation in which we might enter in a few months the Third World War. We are in a situation of climate breakdown where we are unable to stop the destruction of the environment and Mother Nature. There is an amazing level of hunger and inequality that is unacceptable for the 21st century. So we really need to think and step up to the call of reshaping the way we work. Otherwise, we need to be made accountable for not doing enough from whatever position you are in the world, in any organization, in any particular city, in any particular project, in any particular country, whatever is your religion, your background. We all need to step up and realize that this is a moment of truly need for change, for commitment, and for courage. So please, let's have this conversation, which I hope is interactive, is a laboratory of ideas, as Lesley was saying. I'm really looking forward to your exchange. And I'm very much open to discuss with you anything you want to bring to this conversation, as soon as it's based on respect. But let's put it in the background that we are in a serious moment, and that we need to stop thinking that there are good guys and bad guys. We are all responsible, co-responsible of co-creating the world as it is today, which is not a very nice world for the majority of the world, in particular for the people in the global South, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So I wanted to say that first before going into my presentation. Sebastian, if you want to move to the next one, I want to tell you a little bit how I'm routing my presentation, where I'm standing, to share some of the thoughts I want to share with you today, which I hope are going to be an inspiration and are going to kind of challenge you as much as possible. So all the following workshops and sessions and meetings and discussions that you have are deep enough to, mobilize to this idea of thriving that you want to unleash through this conference. So I'm rooting in the idea that the personal is political. that is as many of you may know, is a feminist way of understanding life, meaning that everything we say, we are, our behavior, our thinking, our words, how we work, where we work, how we build our families, how we engage in our neighbors, how we participate in politics in our countries or in our regions. It's also not just an issue of professional career or activist stance, but it's also very personal. And every choice and every decision, even when we speak, in a bus, is something that can really shape reality. So for me, saying that the personal is political is rooting myself as a woman from the Global South. I'm a middle-aged woman, 51 years old. I very recently became a mother for the first time. That's my baby, that Ramona Catalina that you see in my photo. A single mother by choice, meaning that I decided to bring someone to this world by myself, using all the power of the science, and with the hope that I can also with her create something new and different. But it's important that you know that everything I'm going to say is not just coming from my knowledge as someone who studied at the University of Buenos Aires or the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, or someone who worked at the UN, or big organizations like Amnesty, or even with indigenous movements. But it's really coming from a very personal standpoint, as someone like many of you probably at the other side of this screen, who suffer racism, who suffer discrimination, bullying, harassment, just for being myself, just for being a woman, just for being someone who vocally say what I think is truth, is true, just because I stand in the side of justice and equity, and I defend human rights. So for me, what I'm going to share is a conscious process of reflection I've been doing also in these few months of maternity leave, in a way. I'm when Pedro sent me the invitation, I say, oh no, I know, I'm now, breastfeeding all the time. I cannot do this. But then I thought maybe I could, use this conference as an opportunity to take a stock, think what I would like to share now that I'm becoming a mother from a single mother from the Global South, and reflecting these 25, 30 years of engagement, professional career, and activism. So what I wanted to say and also invite you is that we locate ourselves through this conversation, not just in the context of a very complicated, complex world that is falling apart and is being destroyed by all of us, but also I would like to invite you to locate yourself and to think about who you are today. What's your what's your stance in this life? Are you ready to defend, and what are you committing for? What are the risks that you're taking in order to develop more transformative program projects and leading processes of change in anywhere you are? So my invitation before we start is to think about this context where we are living in, but also to invite you to really reflect during these 2 days on who you are as a person and what is your political stance in this work, and how you could probably shift or change as we need if we want to create a better situation for all. So this is, for me, it's important. Sebastian, if you want to move. After presenting you this, which I believe is important, I want to tell you now, in this process of thinking, in preparing for this conference, what I wanted to focus on in my presentation. And I basically said, if I want to propose to all the members of ICRRA and IFA and all the participants that are here today with us, what in my experience is important to think of, to engage to work with if we want to really create transformative international cooperation programs and projects and initiatives. I sort of distill from many years of this practice the areas where I think if we want to be transformative, if we want to be really serious about creating a different and more just world, we need to really concentrate on. The first one, this might sound very strange, and probably not common in these kind of conferences, is that I think we need to focus on love. And I'm going to explain you later what do I mean by that. The second is I think we need to focus on context. Thirdly, we need to focus on power. Fourthly, in trust building, honest trust building. And subsequently, we need to focus on principled action. So these 5 things I believe we need to focus if we want to create new types of international cooperation dynamics are extremely important to me, and I hope I'm successful today in explaining a little bit what do I mean and why this is important according to my views. And after explaining these issues or presenting these ideas of love, context, power, trust, principled action, I will share with you 4 examples of my professional and activist action, which I hope can ground and create and give you some practical examples, as Lesley was saying, on how you really aligned these ideas, align your ways of working with these important principles and guiding energies in a way. I think this is extremely necessary if we really want to thrive. We cannot thrive in this world. We cannot really create any change if we don't focus on these 5 things that I'm going to share with you today. So I'm looking forward, obviously, for your questions, and hopefully also I would like to be challenged by Lesley, by all the participants, to see if I'm missing something here, if maybe I'm getting something wrong, or that, or to hear your own stories on or things that maybe what I'm saying are not really, relevant. So I hope that this triggers a very interesting conversation. So Sebastian, if we go to the next slide. First of all, as I said, I think hopefully in this conference and in general in our professional and activist life as change makers working in the space of international cooperation, I am more and more thinking that we need to talk about love, that we need to talk about emotions, and to work with that as a force of, almost a force of nature, connecting and embodying with these very strong feelings. My impression, and I hope you can tell me if you agree with me or not, is at the moment, progressive people like us, and I assume that most of us are progressive, working for human rights, for mutual understanding, for peace, for inclusive development. Most of us feel that we are losing the battle with the right-wing and far-right forces. In a way, my impression is because we are not effective enough, we are not strong enough in mobilizing around love, in connecting people, cultures, and groups around the idea that we should love each other, or we love each other, that love is not something about our own private life, or only something about our families or our relationship with friends. Love is about also international cooperation. And we don't talk about this. We are fearful of going beyond talking of issues of sciences, evidence, rational choices. On the contrary, the far right, and you may have heard Trump, the president of the United States, talking about how he really hates his opponents. You may recall, or some of you were connected 2 days ago, or he was kind of in this farewell event of after the Charles Kirk was killed, and he basically said, "I hate opponents." And all the far-right movements are very much united together and working with determination and connecting and organizing very much and very well, because they are recognizing that they hate someone else. They hate a refugee, they hate an immigrant, they hate a Black person, they hate women, they hate transgender people. They have identified hate as the mobilizing force. So my question is how we are identifying love and connecting with love, that very positive feeling, love for the other, love for the different, love for someone who is dying of hunger, love for anyone in this world, love for humanity, to mobilize and really create a movement of change that really cannot be felt at the moment because we got lost in bureaucratic, entangled in bureaucratic infrastructures that are killing completely our connection with this very important feeling of love, are disconnecting each other, disconnecting us from intuition, from the big ideas and the big visions and aspiration of the leaders of the past. I don't know if we need to talk about leaders of the past. You all can think who are your own leaders who may be driven by the force of love. And when I say love, is not just religious love, obviously, or as I said, private love or love for someone else, but leaders who really were moved for the love of the other. So I believe that through art and culture, and all of you, in a way, I understand, are working in some sort of project or initiative that mobilize people around arts and culture, have this potential of connecting us, reconnecting us with this very positive, strong feeling of love. So my challenge and my questions to you, and I hope we can discuss later, is how are we going to use art and culture to reconnect with that love and reconnect and mobilize big masses of people, the quantity of masses of people that we need to mobilize around love in order to reshape again international cooperation. And as I said, I very briefly present in these slides, I think that the ideas of the universal human rights were created in a way as an act of love after the Second World War and the genocide of the Jewish people. However, the United Nations and all the institutions that are now being criticized as we speak, meeting in New York at this very moment, are still built on a very unfair mechanisms of power and decision making. They are built on double standards because at the moment there was still countries in Africa, in Asia being colonized. There was still exploitation of the global South countries and exploitations and use of global South resources, and at the same time, people were meeting in New York or building the United Nations around these ideas of universal human rights, completely not recognizing that the struggles of liberation in the global South were taking place and there was a need for self-determination, freedom, and love in a real universal way. So I think that the human rights, at the core of the human rights, are built on this idea of love, but we need to address, and I will explain this a little bit later from my experience working with the UN, in looking at these extremely unfair power dynamics that we have built in our own institutions that are supposed to be defending intercultural dialogue, love, human rights, etc. So my first invitation to you is to think about love, art and culture, and human rights, and how to overcome situations in which we are still entangled in neocolonial practices and not really looking that racist institutions are not really, cannot possibly defend human rights and inclusion. Sebastian, if you want to move to the next one. In this moment, I wanted to share with you a song of Silvio Rodriguez. It's a song that's called Por Quien Merece Amor. Silvio Rodriguez is an extremely famous songwriter from Latin America. And I wanted to share this example as an example of how an artist can really mobilize people together for decades, for years, even now. People like me, that probably were babies in the 70s or the 80s, when in Latin America we were fighting dictators that were propelled and funded by the United States. People like Silvio Rodriguez in Cuba and many other artists, amazing artists, were creating these songs, very eclectic in a way, in their meaning, and mobilizing millions of people around very radical, very transformative ideas. If you read that song, and I think Pedro and Lesley and the team will share later the links to the song with you, some of the most important ideas, for example, of this particular song that I choose is that love is not about market, or it's not about profit. It's about healing. It's about bringing some ideas from below to the top. It's rising the voices that has been silenced and excluded for centuries. In the case of Latin America, indigenous people, all the people fighting for democracy during decades, etc. So I just wanted to mention, and I hope you can think in your own context, who today is representing or not this power of art to mobilize millions around ideas of justice and equity, and how we could do, or you could do, because you are more working directly on artistic and cultural projects, what we could do to really create a new context in which artists are not just, about privatization of intellectual property, or are not just about creating one or two interesting events for profit, a festival, or just influencing with ideas that are kind of superficial and banal in a way. So how and you are engaging or not, or what you could do from the position where you are to use some of these artistic expressions to really mobilize for justice, equity, and inclusion and change. So I hope that after you can all go to perhaps the YouTube and look at for Silvio Rodriguez song, or maybe do a little bit of research of the artists of the past and the present that, like him, are powerful enough to mobilize millions for human rights, and mobilizing millions for democracy and positive change. So the next slide, Sebastian, please. I think I said a little bit about this at the beginning, when I was kind of rooting my presentation or providing the framework of my insights. But just to go a little bit deeper here, if we need to think more and better about love as a mobilizing force for change, in this case in international cooperation initiatives, the second thing that we need to be very serious about is analyzing the context where we are working, the context where our projects are placed, and the context where they are taking place today. With this, I mean we need to be conscious about the history, about the past events that took place, including colonialism, including slavery, exploitation, the denial of rights to vote, for example, among women or Black people, the reality of armed struggles that might be in the past, that might be happening in the present. We need to really understand how each one of our international cooperation initiatives are located in a very complex web of relations between the past and the present that have built grievances, that have generated a lot of suffering in multiple people, in a lot of people, in the majority of the people, that really need have a still with them embodying a trauma because of situation of racism, discrimination, and exclusion. And we need to recognize that reality. If we just think projects or initiatives without thinking in these past and present uh, unfair relations, then we will be building projects that are kind of empty at their heart and not really addressing the root causes of the problems, the root causes of the conflict and the misunderstanding in between different groups, in between different countries, in between different cultures. So in the case of those of us who work a lot in alignment with ideas of decolonization, we, for example, place a lot of attention to the principles and the ideas that were created during the Bandung Conference when the African and Asian countries came together to sort of imagine a different world in which Africa, Asia, Latin America were not, exploited. And then the process of creation of what was called or is called the non-alignment movement. As you may know, the non-alignment movement means not necessarily following the prescriptions, the conditionalities, the standards and the mandate of the United States or Russia in this case, or probably now we could think of China as an emerging, not emerging anymore, but as a superpower. So how the diversity of our countries, of our cultures can really find their own path to generating possibilities, opportunities for equality and justice in their own context. So I invite you to refer to what were the principles, and I will present later, but what were the principles, the guiding ideas of these conferences, the Bandung, and then up until today, the conferences and the messages of a non-alignment movement, now maybe also a little bit being synthesized by the Hague group, that is a group of global South countries also, condemning the genocide in Palestine and many other situation of still, a contemporary exploitation of indigenous people, global South countries, etc. So we need to, if you're based in Germany, if you are based in Argentina, if you're based in Brazil, we all need to think, who are we working with, where we are working with, and how in the past and in the present, because of different situations of conflict, exploitation, etc., the projects that we are organizing are placed in a very complex web of people and different groups feeling still suffering and feeling grievances, and how we can consider that and as a material to develop better projects that address and provide responses to this complex situation. So my invitation is for you to think in whatever project you are working is, what is this material of the past and the present that can generate insights on how to better contextualize your ideas. The following one that I think it's extremely important if we want to develop decolonial projects in a new world is not just understanding connecting with emotions, embodiment of love and connection, and locating in context everything we are doing, not denying the past or the grievances of the present. But the most probably important thing, and this is you don't read in many of the conference presentations or any events, what we as decolonial practitioners and activists are constantly doing is focus on deconstructing power dynamics. This means truly engaging with any group, or when we are designing any particular project, implementing or evaluating any particular international cooperation initiatives, we need to look at who is holding power, who is making decisions, and why, and who is being proactively or subtly excluded and silenced in any particular initiative. And here again, I wanted to bring to your attention a piece of art that is also still mobilizing not only Latin America, but many other organizations and institutions and groups and movements around the world, which is this painting done by Joaquín Torres García from Uruguay, which is called América Invertida, Inverted America, which was basically a mobilizing piece of art where he tried to say clearly maps are a convention. Is not a matter of fact that the South is below in a particular map or the North is at the top of a particular map. We can rethink how maps are being drawn. We need to check and discuss who is drawing these maps, and we need to propose new ways of framing any particular maps. And we use he used the idea of a map, but obviously what we are referring here is just being very critical, thinking who is writing any particular convention, who is writing or any particular project, who is deciding any particular situation, or who is part of any particular status quo. What are the internalized norms and beliefs that are holding us and getting ourselves stuck in certain situations of that because we believe they are real, kind of paralyze us. So it's an invitation to really stop, reflect, and think how power is being exercised and who is holding power, and be ready to challenge those power dynamics. So this is a little bit of the next slide, Sebastian. When we work with our partners in Global Change Center, but in particular with anyone I'm advising, any particular institution or office, this is one of the first things, as I said, that we discuss, we reflect, and we invite or we create spaces of reflection. Again, as I say, if we want to decolonize, we need to respond to this question: who holds power and who is excluded? And we need to proactively make decisions to include those that are being excluded, and to transform these unfair decision-making structures that we see in many of our institutions of the context where we work. So it's really entering into anything you do, any international program that you design or you engage with a conscious decision to respond to these questions and to transform these dynamics. If you are not deconstructing power dynamics, I would say you are not applying a decolonial lens to whatever you are doing in art, in culture, or international cooperation. Sebastian, if you want to move to the next one. And two final things in which I think you need to focus. And again, this is a buzzword that we read or we see in a lot of different conferences, events, conversations. We need to build trust. And here, and considering what I just said about grievances, about the past, about unfair power dynamics, I think that if we really want to engage in trust building, we need to overcome some sort of naive approach to this idea of trust and make sure that we build trust with any particular group, among any particular group of people, or a set of organizations in a negotiating table or in a boardroom, in your own team, etc., addressing these unfair power dynamics. Otherwise, I would say thinking that trust just happens because of a nice encounter in an event, in artistic event, or in an international cooperation event, without recognizing that we are constantly othering, meaning discriminating openly or not so openly people that we don't necessarily respect enough, or if we are silencing the past and not addressing root causes of conflicts and trauma, we are just sort of, in my view, working with a very naive understanding of trust that is not really going to be useful for generating transformative projects. So a power-aware trust-building process need time, need space. Someone who hold this space needs to be facilitated by, ideally, in our view, and this is something that we develop constantly when we work with different organizations, have to be facilitated by professional facilitators, have to be also recognizing there are certain ways of knowledges and languages that normally are not included, and ensure that this facilitator include these different knowledge and languages, and have to be based on creating the mechanism to address these power imbalances between the different groups. So this idea of trust is an idea in which, as I said, we are really aware of whose knowledge, whose voices, whose languages and ideas are normally disregarded, and ensure that we proactively include them in a respectful way in this very serious dedicated time and spaces that we need to co-create in international cooperation. Negotiations are not easy, and we need to recognize that and take it seriously, recognizing past, present, and exclusion. And finally, I'm focusing now in the equity principles. Sebastian, if you want to move to the next one. Perhaps I should have said before, when we were talking about power, is that you cannot really promote equity if you don't address these unfair power dynamics. So when we talk about justice and equity, is this recognition of historical legacies of unfairness and proactive work to create a new balance between the different actors involved in a particular project. Sebastian, if you want to move to the next one, the next slide. So people like me working in the area of decolonization, we don't do anything, a small, big project or program event, without thinking how we are applying specific principles. And I will refer here, but obviously I hope that the the organizers can, if they want, can share the PowerPoint with you. But I will refer to some of the most important principles for us working in the space of decolonization, equity, and justice. In one of these columns, you have the South-South principles that, as I said, were kind of unleashed initially during the Bandung Conference, but are now being used and applied by many of us even today, when it's kind of very fashion to say we are decolonizing INGOs, we are decolonizing think tanks, we are decolonizing different institutions. But what we are doing is trying to see if in everything we are doing, we are promoting self-determination. So we are not imposing standards, we are not imposing criteria or conditionality, that really the demand of what it and the agenda is set by the global south countries or marginalized voices. This is what we call as demand-driven international cooperation. It's not that those with controlling the funds or the money or sitting in global north offices, they are not imposing the agenda or the objective or a particular project, but really it's the demand, in a way, in the global south, who is setting up the agenda and defining the aspirations, the visions, the objective of any particular international cooperation process. Another important South-South principle is horizontal learning, meaning that we try to tackle these hierarchies of knowledge through which, for example, someone with more academic credentials is considered more important or is given more time or for whatever presentation or is given more funds. But we really, as I was saying also before, we really try to facilitate spaces through which everyone knowledge is recognized and is shared in a horizontal way without the imposition of any particular person or institution as superior to any other. And so that means facilitating horizontal learning processes. This is essential in South-South cooperation and any decolonization initiatives. So that's also why it takes a lot of time. Participation takes a lot of time, consultation, voicing, discussing ideas, debating, takes a lot of time, because this horizontal exchange means, and I hope we can do this in the next half an hour after I finish, meaning embracing and recognizing these different experiences, lived experiences, and type of knowledge. And finally, another important South-South cooperation principle is that whatever we do is hopefully directed to increasing autonomy and self-reliance of any particular group, any particular country. So we kind of deconstruct anything that relates to centralized power, creating situation of dependency, for example, through debt, through loans, that most of the time, create a very unfair situation to marginalized people, in particular global south countries, as we are experiencing right now, and not really create a situation of a situation of autonomy and liberation for those that are part of any particular project, program, or global negotiation. So we need to ask ourselves if a particular program is really promoting autonomy and self-reliance or otherwise. Sebastian, if you want to move to the next one.
Cecilia,
Yeah.
to highlight about 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I knew I was going to take a lot of time. But very briefly, and again, the organizers can share some of the links that I'm putting here. With Global Change Center, we are also being kind of distilling what is being discussed as equitable partnership principles. and with the Equity Index and all our partners, the Praxis Institute of Participatory Practices, GENSA, and many others, we've been kind of harvesting throughout a lot of literature and a lot of different publications and working with many organizations around the world. What do we mean exactly when we talk about equity principles? And as I said, in my view, the South-South cooperation principles that I just presented are at the heart and at the core of the historic struggles for equity, and are rooted in this, the leadership of the Global South countries really posing an alternative narrative to the Global North OECD DAC countries' principles. But nowadays, maybe many of you know that all this conversation about decolonization and equity is being reinvigorated in many countries in the Global North because more the Black Lives Matter movement, which is quite recent after the killing of George Floyd. But, and I hope you can access this later, these equitable partnership principles are basically, and Sebastian, you can move if you want to the next slide. You can access this very nice visual, but we try to cluster it with Alex, one of my colleagues and partners, comrades in this process of trying to promote equity with so many different, processes and organizations. We need to be looking at how different projects or programs or initiatives are really promoting transparency and shared accountability. As I said, they need to focus on promoting epistemic justice, which is practically recognizing that there are different ways of knowing, being, and acting in the world, that we need to go beyond standardizing and creating these hierarchies of knowledge, as I was saying, and recognizing the indigenous local ways of creating a knowledge of, including obviously culture, arts, and different expressions. We need to focus on mutuality of learning, on relevance for local communities, and importantly, this project needs to be global South-led. We in decolonization, we don't accept anymore, that there is a prevalence in decision making by global North privileged actors. We need to defend and promote co-ownership between all the global North and the global South, but giving leadership to the global South as promoting this power shift, as I was saying, because we've been historically marginalized, and it's time to recognize that the world have changed and that we are all part of the same world and the same table. And obviously we need to look at if we are creating a situation of mutual benefit through mutual respect and the promotion of fair decisions. How this is done, and I'm going to rush here. It's Sebastian, if you want to move to the next one, it's quite diverse and complex, but not so much. I'm just going to give an example and going to run through my 4 examples very quickly before we enter into the conversation. What we are advising or discussing with our partners, including donors that we are at the moment trying to engage with, we are sort of, for example, saying, what you need to ask when you are developing a particular initiative is how you are budgeting, who is setting up the standards of that budgeting process, how you are cost sharing, how you are establishing fair, transparent, finances, fees, etc. How you are creating processes of receiving feedback, evaluating together with different stakeholders, ensuring that every publication, everyone is recognized. There are very simple things that, believe it or not, in some of the organizations I work with, this doesn't happen. There is no co-budget making, there is no participatory governance mechanisms, there is no attention to the diversity and inclusion, there is no attention to environmental impact, there is no attention to participatory methodologies, etc. So this cannot longer be accepted and will not longer be accepted by Global South organizations, Global South leaders, Global South communities. I think we are now fully aware that how the international cooperation was developed in the past in a very kind of concentrated, impositive way will not longer be accepted and will not longer create a situation of real, true mutual partnership. So this is a big list of different actions and activities, but I hope you can think how you are in your own initiatives and projects today in your own organizations really promoting this inclusivity, participation, and equity through which everyone you are working with feels respected, involved, and truly recognized. So very quickly, just 4 examples before I give Lesley the chance to drink a mate. I can drink a mate and respond any questions that Lesley may have and you may have. I just wanted to tell you super quickly, if you don't mind, Lesley, 2 minutes.
Sure.
Sebastian, can you move to the next one? So very quickly, just to give you a little bit of my story. When I was 28, I created an organization that is called Subir al Sur, Go Up South, which is basically an international volunteering organization. I went volunteering to Asia, Europe, etc., as a young woman from Argentina, and I became super inspired by some of the projects that were developed in Europe, whether they were called work camps or intercultural encounters. And I came back to Argentina and created this organization replicating this model of intercultural exchanges, etc. But to be honest, and I was saying, now that I'm 51, 25 years fast forward, I think that some of these projects, and they are now being revisited in a critical way. Perhaps some of you are now sitting here. It was kind of, the approach was kind of, in my view, as I was saying before, naive, because it was basically developed under the assumption that just by the encounter of different cultures and peoples, we were going to have a situation of mutuality. But this was not real, really happening. What it was happening in all of this encounter was a situation of stereotyping, discrimination, etc. So again, I think that organizations like Subir al Sur that still exist now and volunteering organizations are now addressing how colonial their thinking and their approach was by really looking at repairing grievances, acknowledging discrimination, racism, and creating opportunity to share resources, decision-making, opportunities in these international endeavors. The second one I wanted to share is fast forward 10 years after creating Subir al Sur. And Sebastian, if you move the next one, I work in Amnesty International, one of the big INGOs that is also kind of coming to terms that they are kind of outdated organizations with a lot of concentration of power in the global north. And I did what I think many of us need to do now, which is commit to see how generate and facilitate process to devolve power to the global south. Some of these organizations open up offices in the global south, which is now being challenged as one of the potential methodologies. Other organizations are now trying to create equitable partnerships, as I was saying, with different social movements, civil society organizations, artists, cultural groups, etc. But in any case, and this is a big conversation going on, the principle is that whatever action you are doing from the organization, or in particular if it is based and founded in the global north, how you are really shifting your ways of working. So research, campaigning, cultural activities, advocacy, influencing, whatever you are doing is really rooted, developed, designed, and led by local citizens and by the local indigenous people. So I think Amnesty tried to do a very interesting attempt to do some sort of shift, obviously with a lot of challenges. And finally, my experience with the United Nations Office of South Cooperation, this is more at the diplomatic ambassadorial level, working with all the different ambassadors of the G77 plus China. Something that we need to be aware of is that we need to engage in these diplomatic spaces as civil society organizations, as leaders, as individuals, without fear. In a way, thinking beyond thinking with the head of a non-alignment, and without fearing of engaging with different countries, including, for example, China. So in this case, for example, we brought together think tanks and leaders to co-create knowledge from countries as diverse as Pakistan, China, Argentina, Brazil, all coming together to influence global policy making processes, and standing together, in the face of one or two superpowers trying to impose their standards. So my invitation also from having played an important role in these processes is thinking how you overcome sometimes these barriers for knowledge co-creation with other global south countries, and from a soft north perspective, and design processes that are collaborative, going beyond stereotyping or issues of fears that are being imposed now by certain at the diplomatic level in relation to certain countries. Perhaps I will finish there, Lesley, so we open the space, but just a few words. As I was saying at the beginning, I don't think we can thrive and we can really promote change in today's world if we don't proactively, as I said, focus on this in these 5 or 6, 7 ideas that I mentioned about love, power, context, and trust, honest trust, and the principles that I was just mentioning. We need to align our actions in anywhere we are, in anything we are doing, with these principles and with these ideas. Otherwise, we are just reproducing a very unfair status quo. And as I said, we are just allowing the killing to continue without any counteraction. So I hope we can thrive together in the future. And Lesley, looking forward to chatting with you.
Oh, thank you, Cecilia. That was very rich. I want to start inviting the participants to add your questions. I'm going to keep my questions brief because looking at time, and Cecilia, if possible, if you could reply to them briefly so we can make sure there's enough time for the audience. When you pose the question, situate yourself, and quite often in academic world we say situate yourself in the conversation. Something that came to mind for me is those of us who have mixed lineage, that are a blend of the global north and the global south, and including like expats who return home to the global south, often called third culture kids. I wanted your quick thoughts around, I mean, is there a special role for us to play in terms of developing a more equitable world? And then secondly, a bit of a cheeky question is, can one be a progressive conservative inspired by your faith and driven by love? Or does your conservative side automatically put you in the right-wing camp? Thank you.
Super interesting. Thank you, Lesley. So the first question about expats, and this is a complicated one. I mean, at the moment, I'm based in London. My daughter is British. Can you believe it? I mean, for me, it's something shocking. I'm now going to apply for her Argentine passport, but she was born in London. So we are really a blend of countries and experiences, including in the global north. And we are constantly engaged with our countries, native countries in the global south, in my case in Argentina and Latin America. My dog is called Latin America. I think we do have a role. I was discussing with one of my colleagues recently. Some of the people now are saying that we could be allies in the process of transformation, because we are positioned in the global north. We sort of potentially have access to certain spaces, access to resources, access to certain opportunities that still people in our countries don't have. But I think we need to be very careful on how we play this role, because we can some I mean, we need to. We sorry, that's my dog.
It's okay. We can't hear. We can't hear him.
Sorry. Um, I'm from my house. So we need to be very careful how we use that power in a way of having access and potentially access to resources. So it's really we work based on the demands and based on an agenda that is set by those in our own countries and those that are has been historically marginalized. So our position have to be of a lot of humbleness, working on a receptive way, working in service, rather than probably exporting ideas or imposing you know any standards as anyone could do or normally does, that is based in the global north, at least from my experience. So I think you have to be a very sensitive, and we need to be very mindful of how we play that role. So that's one question. And the second question, if you can be conservative and at the same time connect with the idea of love through faith. This is your question, Lesley?
Yeah, or does your conservative side automatically call you right wing? And I'm asking this because quite often it feels like it's polarized, that you can't be conservative, you automatically othered, if you like.
Yeah, I don't think that if we want to create a new world, there is a space for conservatism, because that would be basically uh, staying in the status quo, creating institutions that are hierarchical, creating mechanisms of decision making in which there is someone considered superior or inferior. So I don't think that through those old-fashioned hierarchies that are defended by conservative people or parties or groups, hierarchicals, etc., can really create a new world, even if they, as they are doing now, manipulating the idea of love as well, Jesus love, etc., as a means to mobilize for political action. I really think that we need to be critical, we need to be progressive, we need to be siding with human rights, and I don't think that conservatives are in that particular side. And yeah, that creates a situation of polarization, but we need to acknowledge that polarization, and as I said, understand that we need to regain power in a way, and hopefully, create a context in which love, humble love, progressive love, respectful love, horizontal love. It's the one that we embed in everything we do and in all our institutions and projects.
I'll park, depending on time, I'll park my one question. But in terms of maps, so we have the African Union that is calling for a change of the maps to present a more more true representation of the size of Africa. How do we onboard partners to drive this agenda in reality?
I remember that being discussed, for example, when I created Subir al Sur, we were using the Peters map, which is really a better recreation, for example, of Africa, many other countries that are much bigger than in the actual maps. I think that movement of challenging representation and conventions through maps, but anywhere, in buildings, in urban design, etc. All of that have to be rethink based on these principles. So I personally very happy that the African Union is putting forward those ideas and many others, including, for example, now pushing for certain changes within the G20, engaging more proactively with other regional blocs or South-South blocs in different policy discussions. We need to enter into all these kind of conversations, negotiation, and reclaim our power, as I was saying, including, for example, in how we are portrayed or painted by the oppressor.
Oh, okay. There's a question from Sarah Berg saying, do you think that different regions, i.e. the diverse global continents, that each have their very distinct spiritual task to bring and share for the global centered oriented human rights decolonization work? What can Asia, Africa spirits bring to the table? I hope that question's clear for you. So the spiritual task, like, do we have a spiritual task?
A spiritual task.
Yes. And like, what can Asia and Africa bring to the table from that perspective? I don't know if you have any views on that.
I mean, you mean spiritual from a religious perspective or from a religion? What sort of a spiritual
Oh, maybe
consideration?
to bring and share. So maybe I'll ask Sarah to expand on that, and then I'll move on to the next question. That goes. So Savika says South-South is framed as more horizontal and demand-led. But what happens when big southern players like China or India dominate the agenda? Does that risk creating new hierarchies? Great
There is
question.
definitely a risk of creating a new hierarchies. We are seeing already those hierarchies taking shape. But I think that is essential that anyone entering this conversation and negotiations enter with consciousness that those hierarchies are not useful and can be destructive. So again, no matter with whom, you need to challenge those powers dynamics and try to create leverage your voice, your resources, your capabilities to negotiate in the better way possible without submitting your ideas or options to any other new superpower. So this is the importance of the non-alignment movement vision, but also creating cross-cultural dialogue and connections, for example, as the one we are creating through with Global Change Center with all our partners in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Together, we are much more stronger. And we need to dedicate time to build these relationships that are not easy at all because we all come from different cultures. We are all located in different experiences, suffering different type of racism, discrimination, and having different ideas of about change. But we decided that together, we are stronger in challenging whatever power, China, United States, Russia, European Union, that are perhaps sometimes trying to to substitute, to marginalize, continue marginalizing actors like us or smaller actors.
And then Katerina says that in her experience, there's never really enough time or resources to take appropriate action and solve structural problems. Do you have any tips to implement?
Any ideas to implement
Yeah.
this try to have more time and space? That's the big question. I think that there is a big movement, and Global Change Center is part of a movement of organizations like us engaging with donors so they can really commit to funding in a different way. Not so much, short-term projects that are not really looking at the time and space required for building solidarity, connection, and honest trust building. Um, and some donors are, looking more at core funding, long-term funding, etc. But also, as I was discussing with one colleague recently, what we are doing constantly in our organizations is activism, which is basically unpaid, not resourced, and ensuring that we, whatever small or big money we receive through these projects that are funded by X, Y, and Z donor, we then anyway commit to a long-term process with or without funding. So even though we need to continue working for a core funding, long-term funding for enough time and space with the donors, we still, if we build, honest partnerships, we still can work together without being dependent on donors shifting their practices today or tomorrow.
In fact, that links to a question I initially had, and maybe I'm answering the you've answered the question. I'll just name it anyway. So, quite often leaders in the global south say that African leaders or leaders from the global south, when we're looking at financial resources, it's often linked to the leader's self-interest and promoting corrupt practices. And yet we know that the global north relies on the south for natural resources, especially if you look in Africa, and sometimes the agenda to support the ending of war. We're seeing it increasingly linked to access resources. And my question was also linked around that, like, what is the sort of like mindset that we need to shift around this, that the north needs and depends on the south for resources as well. And maybe I'm going to extend while you're thinking about that, when you think about equitable partnerships, in 2021 Africa France Youth Summit in Montpellier, President Macron said that the school curriculum does not teach about colonialism.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, even if we change the mindset at a leader perspective, what can we do around changing the mindset in nations around resource mobilization, equitable partnerships?
What can we do? I mean, I think this is the purpose, I suppose, that one of the purposes, I suppose, of this conference. If we know, or if we are now more aware of these principles of equity, of avoiding exploitation, sharing resources, decision-making power, etc., then everyone in each particular context and each particular position will need to respond how to challenge that exploitation of opportunities or exploitation of resources. There is no a global answer to all of that. It really much depends on what's the particular situation that you are working on and referring to. Um, I mean, if I have to, in general, obviously, we are extremely concerned at the moment over-replication of exploitation of resources. This is not stopping, not even through, as you know, the climate summits, negotiations, etc., because of the far right and groups denying all this reality and continuously promoting the indebtedness of our countries in the global south. Just yesterday, the President Trump gave more money to Argentina, which means many more decades of Argentinians paying external debt, etc., and our resources, water, mining, etc., being privatized with all the profits taken by the global north. So this is a continuous challenge, and it very much depends where you are positioned. And I don't know who are the participants, who is in the other side. If you're working on arts, I suppose this sort of extraction and exploitation happen in a different way. But what we need to really think is how to challenge that mechanism of extraction and imposition in every particular situation. And again, I think that's when you have to analyze context. You need to situate the particular project or program or policy that you are designing and devising, and you need to think in the long term how to create the conditions for mutual solidarity, so to challenge those historic dynamics of extraction and exploitation. But I cannot provide, a one single answer, because if I provide one single answer, that means being colonial. I mean, there is no one single answer. Every answer is found through context analysis and power analysis.
Thank you. So we have run out of time, but I do want to share Odila's question. Maybe you could just direct it to where to find more information on Global Change Center. And maybe if you have like a 30-second response around, can we consider AI as a tool to help transparency and equity in public funding? So maybe just your highlight thoughts, and if you share where we can find out more about your work.
I mean, that's is beyond my expertise, and I know that there is evolving conversation and discussions of the role of artificial intelligence today, with a lot of conversation of how to make sure that you put certain standards and criteria to be careful in regards how artificial intelligence is developed and evolve, who control it, and all the risk for humanity. I'm not an expert in that topic, but I really feel that we need to be looking at this issue very closely. But again, thinking more in terms of, how we create counter narratives. If artificial intelligence is now going to create a narrative, a global narrative, because of young kids are connecting to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT telling them, go and kill or kill yourself or whatever. How we as artists, as social change makers, as working with artificial intelligence are going to propel different messages, messages of life, messages of hope, of positive change, of inclusion, of equity and justice. What we need to be looking is how to create counter narratives through artificial intelligence, through arts, through any particular mean. We cannot, stay as quiet as we are today, just accepting the globalization of the far right and the politics of death.
And very quickly, Cecilia, where can we find information on Global Change Center? Just like literally one-liner, because I need to close.
Globalchange.center, www.globalchange.center. We are a very loose platform of partners in America Latina, in Africa and Asia, a group of creators, co-creators, very small organization, but really committed to building networks and solidarity, and created opportunities to put forward the ideas of justice and equity globally. But we will be happy to connect anytime, and you can get my email somewhere.
Thank you, Cecilia. Cecilia, it's going to be impossible to have a closing summary, but essentially, well, thank you. We need to root our work in love, have the South lead the conversation, recognizing our lived experience and promoting autonomy, recognizing that also Indigenous ways of creating knowledge. Thank you so much to everyone for joining our session. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. There's plenty still to come. Huge, massive thank you, Cecilia. I know that you on maternity leave, spending time with your daughter, so it's special that you took the time out to join us. And then for those of you who will be joining the next session, it's on cross-border artivism in a fractured world. That starts at 2 p.m. CET, so please check your time zone. You can use the same link, use the link in your registered email. And yeah, in the name of ICRRA, I'd love to thank you all very much. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you find yourself. Speak to you soon. Take care.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely conference.
Yeah, thank you.